So I was going to start this episode by talking about how when you make a prediction, sometimes it can be a shot in the dark, sometimes it can be an informed guess, most of the time it's somewhere between the two. But this is the time of earnings calls coming out, and a lot of things have been happening within video games that are coming to light now and could potentially be seismic shifts within the entirety of the medium. Hi, I'm Rob, and welcome to Gosu News. And so, the first of these potentially seismic shifts within video games is obviously the news that FIFA and EA have decided to end their decades-long video game partnership. Now, FIFA by EA Sports is obviously one of the biggest selling franchises in video games. It practically dwarfs just about every other franchise. It is one of the major players within the video game space, and it's also one of the sports games that anyone can play. EA have been working with FIFA on football games for 25, 30 years, something like that. And they've been in months of negotiations with FIFA about the license for the video game. Now, the current deal, which was going to end after this year's World Cup, has been adjusted to end after the Women's World Cup next summer. After that, FIFA will be rebranded to EA Sports FC, and Electronic Arts have said that the game itself won't change much. Most of the world's famous clubs and stars will still be playable because of separate licensing deals with teams and leagues all over the world. And even though the World Cup and other FIFA-controlled events won't be included, it may give EA more license to actually broaden their horizons and do interesting and different things with player-driven tournaments, things that are outside FIFA's sphere of influence. We'll have to see how it goes. Now, one of the reasons for the split was from EA's side. They wanted exclusivity from FIFA. FIFA didn't want to give that because they felt that the video game space has changed so much over the years. They wanted to explore new partners, new consoles, new possibilities, which is fair enough. Unfortunately, that's one of the straws that broke the camel's back, so deal was off. That leaves EA free to pursue all sorts of avenues about how to do a football game, but it also leaves FIFA free to pursue other partners to open themselves up to new consoles, new possibilities. We may even get a FIFA game on mobile devices like phones and tablets. You never know. There are all sorts of really good football games already out there on iOS and Android. FIFA President Gianni Infantino has said, "I can assure you that the only authentic real game that has the FIFA name will be the best one available for gamers and football fans." The FIFA name, which he suggested the organisation would reclaim for its own game, is the only global original title. But this is the thing. FIFA wants to have their own exclusive football game, but they lack EA's years, decades of experience with making football games. And so they will have to start from scratch, or they will have to go to someone like Konami and say, help us make a football game. Now, I do doubt that FIFA are going to go to Konami, but it's not outside the realms of possibility. Anyway, Tariq Panja of the New York Times is the person who broke the potential split between EA and FIFA back in October last year. He's written a really interesting piece about the whole situation in the New York Times. I will link it in the description below. It's well worth reading if you are interested in this story. But that's not where the EA story ends. See, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's the time of earnings calls and all sorts of profit reports and stuff like that coming out. And EA have posted an update on their release slate for the rest of the fiscal year as part of their latest earnings report. And in that report, they listed 5 titles scheduled to release during the 3 months ending March the 31st, 2023. 4 of those titles have not yet been publicly disclosed and have only been listed as major IP, partner title, remake, and sports title. The 5th one is a PGA Tour game. So we can discount that. We know what that game is going to be all about. The other ones are really interesting though, especially the major IP. There are speculations that the major IP could be Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order 2, which was reportedly targeting a 2022 release, but that's not confirmed as yet. There's also a possibility that the remake title could be Dead Space. Again, not confirmed. We will keep an eye on this, and we will keep you informed as to what changes happen. But we're going to move on. New York City is suing Activision and targeting CEO Bobby Kotick. This is according to a report that came out in Axios. The Office of New York City's Comptroller has shared a public version of the suit, which was filed in Delaware on April the 26th by New York City Employees Retirement System and Pensions Fund for the city's teachers, police, and firefighters. Now, what does that mean? It means that the retirement fund invested in stock for Activision, and the operators of the retirement fund now believe that Bobby Kotick's actions and the actions of the board of directors devalued the price of the stock prior to the potential sale to Microsoft, because it's still up in the air. It's not been confirmed. It's not been finalized. Now, New York City is demanding Activision provide a long list of documents including material related to the Microsoft deal, info on 5 possible buyers cited in Activision's official description of the sales talks, board memos, and more. The city has been pressing Activision for internal documents since the fall, originally to find out what CEO Bobby Kotick knew of sexual misconduct at the company. As laid out in the complaint, New York sought access to Activision's books as a basis to sue Kotick and board members for allegedly costing the company value. It expresses frustration that Kotick, already under fire, headed up rapid negotiations in late 2021 to sell the company to Microsoft. The City of New York has said that the Microsoft deal, which is pending regulator approval, allows Kotick and his fellow directors a means to escape liability for their egregious breaches of fiduciary duty. It also says Microsoft's $95 per share offer undervalues the company, which was trading at close to that before Activision's public scandals began last summer. So yeah, that is happening. Meanwhile, over in California, Activision Blizzard have asked a court to dismiss the lawsuit by California's Department of Fair Employment and Housing. The filing in the Los Angeles Superior Court said that the DFEH had failed to properly investigate claims prior to the filing of the lawsuit. The filing also said that the DFEH failed to negotiate a resolution and failed to mediate with the company before it filed the lawsuit last year, and Activision Blizzard said that in the process, the DFEH unfairly damaged the reputation of the company and undermined public trust. In a statement, Activision Blizzard has said, "We are moving to dismiss the DFEH's complaint because the agency violated its own rules, acted in bad faith, and undermined its authority to file the lawsuit." Now, this move for the California courts to dismiss the DFEH's lawsuit comes just days after a very, very suspicious ruling by the EEOC, which kind of went in favor of Activision Blizzard. You're talking about a company that Microsoft are buying for $70 billion, and yet for all of their breaches and all of the scandals and everything like that, they were only fined $18 million, which is basically a day's profit for them. And when you find out there are people who work for the EEOC who have ties to people on the board of directors for Activision Blizzard, they're potentially friends. I'm not saying that they're definitely friends. I think Bellula did a very good video on this, which actually shows some of the links between Activision Blizzard and the EEOC. It would suggest that the board of directors and Bobby Kotick have basically been in cahoots with the EEOC. They've come to this resolution, find a minimum amount so they can overturn California DFEH's case. Is that collusion? I would suggest it is. Now, on the back of what's going on in New York and what's going on in California, Activision Blizzard is gearing up for their first union election, which is going to be held by 28 quality assurance testers at Raven Software, which is a subsidiary that makes Call of Duty titles in Madison, Wisconsin. Now, they've been mailing their ballots to vote on the elections before a May 20 deadline. Employees have come forward and said to the Washington Post, Finally being able to vote yes made all of the hard work we've put in over these past 5 months worth it. The fact that Activision tried so hard to stop our union every step of the way makes it clear that a union is necessary at this company. I would suggest a union is necessary at all major video game publishers and developers. Now, management at Raven has been sending employees messages and holding meetings about the upcoming election, according to the current Raven Software employees. And at an April 26th town hall, leadership at Raven suggested that unionization might impede game development and affect promotions and benefits. They sent an email to employees the next day with a graphic attached that read, "Please vote no." Several Raven employees have told the Washington Post that they found management's anti-union messaging to be disappointing and ineffective, as they still voted yes. Activision Blizzard have said in a company statement that they are investigating legal options. Isn't that kind of suggestive of how most big corporations think? You have this huge disparity between the low-level workers, the people who actually do the stuff, and the seniors, the board of executives, the senior executives, the president, the vice president, whatever. There's this massive disparity in how they think. One believes that they see the whole picture and that what they're doing is for the good of the company, completely ignoring the fact that the company isn't just the building, the bricks and mortar, it's the people who make the stuff. And if you don't protect the people who make the stuff, then your company, in my eyes, is worthless. And it would be a good thing if more commentators in video games, more YouTubers, Twitch streamers, more journalists in video games called them out for what they are. The board of directors and people like Bobby Kotick, they don't belong on any board of directors. They should be struck off permanently being allowed to sit on any board of directors for what they've allowed to happen at Activision Blizzard and the culture that they've festered, not fostered, but festered. Which brings us to Sony. Now, Sony's chief financial officer, Hiroki Totoki, has reiterated the corporation's belief that the quality of its first-party games would decline if they were added to PlayStation Plus on day one, in kind of the way that Game Pass does things. Now, he was speaking as part of the Q&A session following Sony's financial results, and he said that if Sony were to follow Microsoft's Game Pass model, it could result in fewer resources allocated to first-party titles and thus a decline in quality, which is basically what Jim Ryan said. According to Sony's CFO, AAA titles on PlayStation 5, if we distribute them on the subscription service, we may need to shrink the investment needed for that. That will deteriorate the first-party title quality, and that is our concern. Fair enough. They know their finances better than pretty much anyone else. And, just to point out, they are referring more specifically to first-party titles, not third-party ones. So, there is still the potential for third-party titles to be available at some point in the future, maybe with negotiating licenses and stuff like that. And the idea of demos and limited game trials is still a good one, but I do not see the justification for me paying the highest tier for PlayStation Plus for a few demos, or so I can play a game for 2 hours. To put it in business terms, it's going to cost, and I don't see the benefit. So, we've reached Sony, so we have to talk about Microsoft, and there are several things about Microsoft that have happened over the last week. First one was the outage. Now, Microsoft have apologized for that. They're making improvements. The updates are happening. They've been heavily criticized for it. Loads of people have talked about it. I'm not going to bother. What I am going to talk about, though, is a story that surprisingly has flown under the radar ever since it came out last year, and has only now started reappearing in places like VentureBeat. Xbox are planning to launch a streaming puck and a Samsung app in the next year. This ties in with an announcement that Microsoft made at some point in 2021. I can't remember exactly when. Now, what Microsoft said at that point was that they wanted to make the video game equivalent of Amazon's Fire Stick, and that they would be partnering with TV manufacturers to have Game Pass built into certain TVs. Now, if I was Sony or Nintendo, I would be terrified of that prospect because that would basically negate consoles. And with Microsoft pushing all sorts of improvements to xCloud and cloud gaming, this new streaming puck and the Samsung app are potential massive game changers for the video games industry. Sony might have things like PlayStation Now, but I put this to you. How many people do you know who own an Amazon Fire Stick, or who you've bought an Amazon Fire Stick for, or some kind of USB device that you plug into a TV that allows them to watch and stream TV channels? How many people use one? How many people do you know who uses one? That's the level of accessibility that Microsoft are going for. And think about it like this. How much does a Fire Stick cost? £25? £30? If you can buy a device that allows you to play console games through your TV with a cloud streaming service with very little lag, and it's only going to cost you 30 quid. Do you remember when things like OnLive and Gaikai came out and everyone was saying it's the next stage of video games, but it never achieved its potential? And then Stadia came out and it still never achieved its potential. Maybe Microsoft's approach is the correct approach. They should have built up a subscription service first, then done the streaming bit. We'll see how things pan out. Anyway, another story that's been making the headlines in a very understated way in relation to Microsoft is their Ability Summit. Now, several companies attend this summit, but Microsoft are the ones who host it. And at that summit, they made two big announcements. Xbox announced a new gaming accessibility resource hub for devs, which gathers its accessibility guidelines, courses and trainings, and links to a wide variety of documentation and tools so developers can increase the accessibility of their titles. Microsoft did make their accessibility guidelines for Xbox available to everybody since November 2019. They've also been updated to include information about mental health issues, motion sickness, and further guidance on text sizing. This new version is already available to view on Microsoft's website, and it's amazing that this sort of resource hub is available for any developer to access. They also unveiled their Buildability World in the Education edition of Minecraft. It's made in partnership with Peel District School Board in Ontario, Canada, where users can learn about disabilities and eliminate accessibility barriers around them. They also announced not just one, but a whole range of accessibility-focused adaptive accessories. Now, this is almost 4 years to the day after Microsoft formally unveiled their well-received Xbox Adaptive Controller, and this new range of accessories is intended to provide a highly adaptable, easy-to-use ecosystem for those who have difficulty using a traditional mouse and keyboard. This range has been designed in partnership with the disability community, and the new adaptive accessories consist of three main components: an adaptive mouse, adaptive buttons, and an adaptive hub, with the idea being that users can augment the first two devices with 3D printed accessories in order to customize mouse and keyboard inputs in a way that best suits their needs. Now, this range of accessories, combined with the new tools being made available for developers, it's such an amazing thing for people who have limited abilities to be able to play games. Video games have a very therapeutic benefit in certain ways for certain conditions. There are also pain management benefits for people who can't take normal medication. Video games can help with that. There is lots of scientific research that's going on into the medical benefits of playing video games, because it's not all bad. And those are the kind of things that these tools help with. Personally, I'd really like to know what the likes of Nintendo and Sony are doing in terms of accessibility, because I don't really see a lot of movement on that front. Not from either company. Microsoft, yes, okay, they are a much bigger corporation, and so yes, they can throw money at this. But that doesn't prevent Nintendo or Sony going to Microsoft and saying, we'd like to be more accessible for people. Can you help us? This is one of those occasions when the tribalism that's inherent in video games needs to be put to one side, and companies need to work together to make video games accessible for everybody. Anyway, we're at our final story, and this might seem weird because we're starting off with Capcom, but it all kind of relates to what I was talking about last week when I was talking about Final Fantasy XVI and Square selling off Eidos Montreal, Square Enix Montreal, and Crystal Dynamics. All of those IP that went with them, Tomb Raider, Legacy of Kain, all that stuff. And I posited that it was because of Final Fantasy XVI and because Square Enix wanted to take on Elden Ring. As I said right at the beginning of this episode, what I posited last week might actually be closer to the truth than I originally thought, because it was basically a shot in the dark. But there are some things that suggest maybe I was on the right lines. First off is the fact that Resident Evil Village has driven Capcom to their 5th year of record profits. They've reported net sales of $846.3 million and sold a record number of games at 36.2 million. Now this is thanks to Resident Evil Village, but also thanks to a Switch exclusive Monster Hunter spin-off. I'm not going to go through the entire financial report. I'm just putting this out there because I want you to remember Capcom made a record profit. They weren't the only ones. Bandai Namco's profits rose almost 50% in the financial year of 2022. Sales were also on the rise, up 20% to $6.8 billion. Bandai Namco have reported a very strong year, with their operating profits rising 48.2% to 125 billion yen, which is around $963 million. Now, one of the games, obviously, that is leading that charge is Elden Ring, which I think at the last count had sold something like 13.4 million units. Again, not going to go through the entire report. I just want you to remember Bandai Namco have made record profits. So that's two Japanese companies who basically took a step back, went back to the basics, and are now recording massive profits. Once could be coincidence. Twice, maybe there's something in the water. And maybe Square Enix wants some of that stuff that's in the water. Which leads us to Square Enix. Final Fantasy Union did an interesting video recently where they were talking about some of the people who are working on Final Fantasy XVI. Not just Naoki Yoshida, who is the producer of Final Fantasy XVI, but also the director of Final Fantasy XIV, but also Hiroshi Takai, who is the director of Final Fantasy XVI, and some of the other people who are involved in the game. People who've been pulled over from other companies, like Capcom and Bandai Namco. People who have a wealth of experience with combat systems, which the video by Final Fantasy Union breaks down and highlights. It's really informative, and I've put the link in the description below, so I suggest you watch it if you are interested, and if you think my argument is starting to have more weight. The other part of the argument is when you find out that there are developers on Final Fantasy XVI who previously worked on an IP that was very similar to Bloodborne before Bloodborne was even a thing. Now, this was according to an article that appeared in Famitsu magazine. Naoki Yoshida and his fellow Final Fantasy team members Hiroshi Takai, the director of Final Fantasy XVI, and Hiroshi Minagawa reminisced about their previous game that was basically Bloodborne when Bloodborne wasn't even a thing. According to Takai, their game had the same weapons and guns that they ended up seeing in Bloodborne, and it had a similar gothic style. It also had a few sci-fi elements. Yoshida added, "When I first saw Bloodborne, I thought, where have I seen this before? Thinking about it now, I don't think our personal interests were very Final Fantasy," stated Takai, while Minagawa joked, "If we'd kept going and Bloodborne was released first, we'd probably be freaking out right now." Apparently, the unreleased IP would have had multiplayer elements, which the threesome likened to those of Evolve, where one player would be a strong killing machine while the others would have had to do their best to avoid being caught. According to Yoshida, it was basically Bloodborne plus that system. If we'd kept going, I think we'd still be working on it right now. Now, doesn't that just blow your mind? You have the director of Final Fantasy XVI admitting that he and the producer of Final Fantasy XVI, Naoki Yoshida, and one of the other seniors all worked together on a game that was basically Bloodborne. And then think about the setting for Final Fantasy XVI. Think about the trailer that we've seen. Think about the trailer that's coming out soon. And then think about what I said. Square Enix are taking a step back to take several steps forward, or a massive leap forward. Think about the profits that Capcom and Bandai Namco have reaped by doing exactly that. So I think all of this talk about Square Enix being bought out, and I'm becoming more certain that they're throwing the dice on Final Fantasy XVI and on their golden child, Naoki Yoshida. It's a lot to wait for a person to bear, but he has the chops for it, I think, and he's got a good team behind him. He might not be the director of Final Fantasy XVI, but that's because he's already the director of Final Fantasy XIV. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I've given you a lot to think about with that final story. Let me know what you do think in the comments below. I'll be back on the next episode of Gossip News. Until then, thanks for watching.